In this video, we're going to check out viewer encounters with little people in Latin America. So that's South America, Central America, and Mexico. I'm going to start with Lone Spirit of the Night, 2561, 5 years ago. Someone kept vandalizing my uncle's restaurant he owned out in Mexico on a lonely desert road he used kind of like a rest area for truckers. They also were scaring the horses and farm animals he kept nearby. My cousin had enough. He was pissed. He decided to start staying overnight with a loaded .22 pistol to try to catch somebody maybe. One night he heard the pots and pans in the kitchen just smashing all around. He got up and noticed that the lights were off. When he flipped the light switch on, he said he saw about a half dozen or so little ugly guys about 2 feet tall, pointed ears and everything. He was so shocked he was scared to death to shoot them. He was so shocked he was too scared to shoot them. When my uncle got there in the morning, the gun was on the floor, and my cousin was just sitting there, severely traumatized. He couldn't even speak for days. They eventually were forced to abandon it. So, interesting thing here is that he hears the pots and pans in the kitchen smashing around, which sounds so much like a poltergeist story. And we've covered this in previous videos. Poltergeist stories are when some entity, I guess, starts bothering. Usually it revolves around a teenage girl, sometimes a teenage boy, and it's often on a remote property, and it's always kind of mischievous activity, loud noises, things flying around, fires starting, things like that. So this kind of a little bit marries the two things together, poltergeist stories and little people from Mexico. Next one's Daniel Anthony Burgos, 3657, 5 years ago. We also have folklore in our country, which up until now our natives tell us stories about their experiences about dwarves, or what we call duende in my country. Some of our natives say that these little races live deep inside our inhabited mountains, and they do really have a reputation of taking women in particular. So two things, living inside the mountains, that's a thread in the Stoney Indians of Canada's Rocky Mountains say that the folklore says that the little people live inside the mountains, and taking women is a thing that is a common with the Dene Athabascan little people stories from up north in subarctic Canada. Next comments, Hemlock 999, 4 years ago. There's tons of stories about little people in Mexico. Next comments, Albuse 5 years ago. Little duendes here in Central America, I've heard of them since the 70s. A German tourist took a picture of one. They look evil. And I recall somebody saying before that, I can't remember if it was in our little people videos from Europe or from Oceania, but they were saying that the little people are supposed to look evil. Next comments, Why the Stupid Hurts, 5564, 3 years ago. In Yucatan Peninsula, Mexico, there are tales of little people, but it's hard to find or hear much. Most is long gone, but there's some family lines they pass the tales down. It really seems like there was a little people race there somewhere in the mix. Next comments, Diana Graff, 4 years ago. I got goosebumps listening to these stories in many parts. In my native country in Central America, we believe in duendes, which are small folk, fairies, gnomes. The name can be translated to many English descriptions. What got to me is in my family we were told as children at the time to scare us that our great-uncle was once taken by the duendes. This would have been in the 1920s. That they caught up to him in time, and he was left in a pile of firewood. It could have been someone trying to kidnap him, and in their haste to run away, when they heard the family come after him, they left the baby. But here's what got to me, his speech. My great-uncle has a stutter and was very hard to understand, and was very childlike. We all loved him. But after listening to this tale and how the return could have speech problems, well, it just gave me goosebumps. So she's for sure referring to, I did a video on some of the settler stories from Canada, like little people in Euro-Canadian settler folklore. And the ones from Newfoundland say that when a person will go into the woods and they think he gets stolen by fairies, person will disappear for days, sometimes a child, and then will be found or returned, and they will have no memory of what had happened to them, but they will have for the rest of their lives, they'll be stricken with some mental disability, maybe a speech impediment, some sort of problem that haunts them for the rest of their lives, and it's attributed to the fairies' magic being too strong for them to handle. So that's really weird, that the same kind of phenomenon of somebody getting lost in the woods and then being found and having lifelong mental disabilities afterwards, and physical disabilities sometimes in the Newfoundland stories, that they attribute that to duendes, just the same as the Newfoundland people attribute this phenomenon to fairies. So a very obvious, eerie example of the same strange phenomena being attributed to little people. Next comment, Pinilda Moreno, 3 years ago. Mayas in Yucatan, Mexico have their own little people called aluxes, or is it alohes? Very similar stories, too. Next comment, Skarsnik of the Crooked Moon 0013 3 years ago. Here in Costa Rica, we call them duendes, or enanos verdes, green dwarfs. My grandma and her sisters were kidnapped by them with weird candies and lovely music. They are mostly evil here. So they were kidnapped by them with weird candies. Reminds me so much of, you might recall I did a video on little people stories, like subscriber stories. People would email me. And I did one on, one of the stories was a guy from New Hampshire, I think. And he was saying that one time he was taking his son for a walk. His family was walking out in the woods somewhere in New Hampshire, and his son went ahead and came back and said he saw a little man with metal colored skin, and he had offered him some candy. The little man offered him some candy. He refused and went back to his dad. And his dad thought this was really strange, but later he was on the internet looking at things and learned about the legend of the Pukwudgies, the little people of New England, legendary little people. And whatever source he was using said that they have gray-colored skin, which he thought sounded a lot similar to the metal-colored skin his son had talked about. And the idea of dwarves luring children away with food or candy is a thread that's common in Newfoundland fairy lore. So in Newfoundland fairy lore, they say that the fairies offer people fairy food, and if you accept it and eat it, you will be trapped in their fairyland. You can't get out. And then, weirdly, on Vancouver Island in British Columbia, at the northern end, the Kwakwaka'wakw have stories about, they call it the Bakwas, or the wild man of the woods. And it's always depicted in masks as it has a very horrific face, a very frightening face, and long hair. And this thing is supposed to haunt the woods and like woodland streams and stuff. And it for sure has some sort of connection with the Kushtaka of Tlingit folklore further north. And with the Tlingit and the Talton, they call it the Kushtaka, or the Land Otter Man, which is like associated with drowning victims. And it's kind of like a fairy that will cause people to hallucinate, and it'll trap them in their own world. And the Bakwas is for sure has some sort of connection to it. But instead of living in the ocean as the land otters are supposed to do, having association with the ocean, the Bakwas lives in the woods, and it will have food, and it will try to convince people to eat its food, and if they do, they will become a Bakwas, just like it. So a weird common thread where, for lack of a better word, elves, or some sort of preternatural entity in the woods, tries to offer people food in order to trap them, or make them become like themselves. Next comments, Embalm Mertrick, 1420, 3 years ago. Little folk are also part of Mexican folklore. They're called aluxes. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I know in Mexico sometimes the X's are pronounced like H's. Next comments, Lillian Rue, 2747, 3 years ago. Sounds similar, like El Pombero from South America. Though from what I understand, El Pombero was a hairy being, short and loved tobacco, but who actually knows? So it sounds like there's two different kinds of little people in South American folklore. One is like the Dwendes. Oh, sorry, there's three here. So there's Dwendes, which sound a lot like kind of the European dwarf fairy legends. And El Pombero, if it's hairy and likes tobacco, that's exactly like the Memegwesoak of Cree, Algonquin, Ojibwe folklore in Canada, which are supposed to be short little hairy water sprites that live inside cliffs that fringe rivers and lakes. So you've got El Pombero, aluxes, and Dwendes. Next comments, one Polvo Magico 3 years ago. Again, similar stories from here down in South America, and although I haven't personally seen any little people, I have a close friend that swears he met one while he was playing soccer with a group of friends. Rather than fleeing, they tried to catch it, but soon he disappeared between a line of trees. Another person, which wasn't so close, so I can't verify or dismiss, told once his grandmother saw one lurking in his backyard on a rainy night. After seeing him leave hastily through the bushes, she went to investigate. To her surprise, the little guy left a shoe behind. This person saw the shoe once. It was very tiny, like a doll, or a very small child. Amazingly crafted, and it was made from bat leather. However, if it had sole and or shoelaces was not mentioned. One granduncle once told me that he could hear him/it sometimes in the night, riling up the horses and riding them until dawn. In the morning, the horses were exhausted and sleeping, but all of them with intricate braids on their manes. So that is identical to the French-Canadian stories of the Luton, which are little French-Canadian goblins. They're supposed to take people's horses out at night and ride them all through the night, bring them back all lathered in sweat and exhausted, and then they weave these little tiny braids into their manes and tails, and they're so intricate that they can't be undone. So interesting to have that same commonality in South American folklore. Next comments Cheetah Nala 6120, 3 years ago. Hi, I'm new to your channel. The Dwendes are well known in the Caribbean. My grandmother, who is Grenadian, says that they can grant you great wealth or prosperity, and you have to feed them, but there was always a price to pay. Love this channel, by the way. I wonder what the price to pay was. And they can grant you great wealth and prosperity, kind of like in the Kashubian Canadian dwarf stories that I've researched. If you catch them, they can give you gold. I know that's also a thing with the leprechaun stories, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow with the leprechauns, but I don't think leprechaun is actually a traditional Irish story. I feel like it's fairly modern. If you enjoy these unpolished videos of mine, you might be interested in my new channel, the Gary Mangiacopra Archive. On that channel, I go through the files of the late great Gary Mangiacopra, one of the most prolific Fortean archivists in the world, who spent his life collecting material on unexplained phenomena. Don't let the thumbnails turn you off. There's no AI in these videos. It's just me going through the archives, reading the most interesting stories. If you'd like to check it out, please click the link in the description. Next comment's Morphidae 1 year ago. In Mexico, we call them aluxes. I saw one of them once. I was on my usual walk through an isolated trail near where I worked and lived when I saw him. He was like a 1-year-old child. I remember his belly was protruding like that of a child, his tiny hands and feet, but fully covered in thick black fur. It looked more like hair, to be honest, than fur. It was like thick beard hair all over his body, from head to toe. He was looking at the sky sideways. He was like thinking and scratching his head and holding his chin really focused on something. Instead of running away, I was amazed and tried to walk faster to him to take a picture. He got scared and ran into the trees, but he disappeared too quickly, and it would have been impossible for him to disappear there. There was almost no grass and trees were thin and scarce. So another hairy little man, and he's saying that the aluxes are supposed to be hairy, just like somebody said the El Pombero was supposed to be hairy. One thing I forgot to mention was I remember when I did a video on viewer comments regarding whistling at night. I think El Pombero was mentioned a few times. It was saying it was a little person from, South American folklore, Central American folklore, and it would whistle at nighttime. And if you whistled, it would whistle back. And the interesting thing, it was a couple times people had said this. If you heard the whistle close by, it meant it was very far away. But if you heard the whistle sounding like it was far away, that meant it was very close to you. So it sounds like aluxes and El Pombero might be names for the same sort of legendary entity. And I just want to go back to something the commenter said. He said that this thing disappeared in a place where there was no place it really could have disappeared in. A place with no grass and the trees were thin and scarce, which kind of brings to mind the idea that little people are interdimensional. I don't like using the word dimensional, but that they can disappear and go into somewhere else where we can't see them, if that makes sense. Next comment's History of Aztlan 1 year ago. Aztlan being the mythological birthplace of the Aztec or Mexica people. Very interesting video. The New Hampshire story sent chills down my spine. My dad's family is from the western part of the Estado de Mexico. They saw Dwendes and his brother-in-law would be visited by them offering him candy. His mom saw this and embraced him strongly so he didn't run off and take the candy. Supposedly if you accepted their sweets, you'd go missing. So another story about these little people offering candy. And he's referring to the New Hampshire video. Andres, 1991, 1 year ago. In my dream, I was still a teenager, and my little brother was still a toddler. We were at a market in Mexico, those that have no walls or air conditioning, just an aluminum roof. While walking through the aisles, there was a group of kids playing tag, and they got my brother to play tag along with them, so I watched them play from a distance. Soon I lost sight of my brother through the crowd, and I couldn't see him anymore. As one of the kids ran past me, I stopped him by placing my hand on his shoulder, but when I turned the kid around, to my surprise, it wasn't a kid. Instead, I noticed that it was a man that just happened to be very short in stature, and he ran off to a warehouse not too far from the market. I followed the short man into the warehouse, which was hot and only lit by sunlight. I realized the kids were playing hide-and-go-seek because I saw the child crouch behind a cardboard box, hiding and signaling me to be quiet. Suddenly, from the second level, a large pallet fell from the shelf, crushing the child beneath it. Out from behind where the pallet fell, the little man emerged, grinned, and ran off. I then woke up. So a weird, creepy dream about a little person in Mexico with a mischievous bent, which is a kind of common theme in little person stories, having a mischievous bent. Next comment's Trevor Olson, 921, 1 month ago. In the winter of 2014, I relocated from Edmonton, Alberta to a cabin in the middle of the jungle in southern Costa Rica, just outside a town called Golfito. 5 kilometers down the road and another 2 kilometers into the jungle on a small path, I watched a Canadian expat's property for over a year. The Costa Rican I took over for spoke broken English, and I spoke broken Spanish, so we could communicate fairly easily considering. The second or third night I was there, he warned me to never wander into the jungle at night, which seemed obviously like good advice. Not because of snakes and wildlife, or getting lost, but because of the little people, which he was terrified of. About a foot in height, wearing pants and suspenders and wide pointed hats, he said they blended in like large mushrooms, as camouflage when startled. But the dangerous part was that they were gold miners. Costa Rica is literally the rich coast. They would dig up gold at night and rebury it in their secret stash spots in the jungle, finding those spots with glowing stones they carried with them. I've seen those bluish-white lights glowing and moving in the underbrush at night, from my cabin dozens of times over the course of my stay. Like a lantern carried by a person, exactly, but never higher than a foot off the ground. He was, as I said, terrified of these little gnomes. So again, we have the idea of them being associated with gold or riches, which I know is a thing with some of the Slavic dwarf stories. And then the little bluish-white lights that he sees glowing at night sounds just like Will-o'-the-Wisp, which is another universal folktale in cultures all over the world where people see strange lights at night in the wilderness, and the folktales warn you not to follow the lights because they will lead you astray into the woods, into a dangerous area from which you can't get back from, or it's dangerous to get back from. So associating Will-o'-the-Wisp with little people in Costa Rica. Next comments, Ananda Santiago, 1994, 11 months ago. I'm from the northern region of Jalisco, Mexico. My hometown is nestled in one of the many valleys or lower ends of the Sierra Madre Occidental. This is still mostly a rural area with towns scattered around. It has a varied topography and microclimates ranging from bush and cactus to oak and pine forests. Farmers and peasants have benefited mainly by foraging, hunting, wood gathering, and pasturing their cattle for sustenance. I grew up hearing stories of men who went deep into the lands where they had encounters with small people. Descriptions of what they'd seen varied in appearance, demeanor, and habitats. The commonality was the sincerity of their accounts and the richness of the details. One story I still remember was told by my maternal aunt's husband that he'd heard from his grandmother on her deathbed. In my estimation, this story took place about 100 years ago, when the country was much less populated and everything more rudimentary. As a little girl, her father would take her in the early mornings with her itacate, food and drink packed and tied in a cloth, riding her donkey beyond the hills into a larger mountain, when he left her to go shepherd their goats. She was left all on her own, all day with her dog and donkey to pasture. My guess is she was between 6 and 10 years old. As any child, she started to explore around. In her games, she encountered what she called fairies. They played with her, kept her safe, and even brought her into their underground homes. This went on until she grew old enough to be released from those chores. As I recall, the grandma died of old age, and as her day approached, she summoned her descendants to confess the secret existing of her friends. She asked her children to protect those lands at all costs, to leave the wilderness undisturbed so that they could live peacefully and safely. She also knew exactly where they lived and how to find them, but she was sworn into never revealing their existence. At the end, she realized she needed to reveal the reason why she wanted the land she inherited to be kept untouched. I cannot affirm the veracity of this account, but if the shocked expression of my aunt while she told us the story is any indication, I'd say the story is true. So this story is exactly like a Mexican variation of an old Iroquois story. I can't remember, maybe Seneca story or maybe Mohawk story from it must be from upstate New York, but for some reason I put it in my video on Little People stories from the Ontario Peninsula, which is like a big populated area, like with Toronto, Hamilton. And in that story, there was a little Iroquois girl, a little Haudenosaunee girl, and she was left alone for some reason, or maybe she got lost, and she encountered this family of little people, and they were kind to her, and they invited her to stay with them in their cave, in their underground cave, which you could get into by a rock would open up, and they'd walk down into this cave. And in that story, they gave her gifts, and they swore her never to tell anybody about them. So this story is like a almost identical Mexican variation of that Iroquoian story. I'll include the link to all these videos in the description. And I think this is the last comment, and I just noticed it right before I made this video, or did the narration for it. So it's a very new comment by N. Schnalzel 1 hour ago. We have these people all over Mexico. You need to ignore them and not engage, especially never say sorry or excuse me or thank you. It's a little bit difficult for Canadians, just so you know. Let them live their lives on your property, and when you cross paths on your property, just continue as if they do not exist, and don't look back or get involved. If you see any of the boys or men in the daytime, especially be careful, because they have been shunned and are up to no good, and were driven away by their community. If they have special areas, then stay away from that area, or wear bells and talk loudly, and have conversations and wear mint or rue or something strong that is not floral or too nice that it will catch their attention. And then he did a comment on his comments saying, "They have magical powers too, and sometimes come to you with a bang or loud noise or thunder behind them to make a large presence. Ignore it as if nothing special." Okay, and that is the end of Little People Stories from Latin America. And we still have stories from Asia, the United States, and I have a section on like domestic Little People Stories that don't really have a specified location, but they're all kind of either in the home or on a rural property. So we will continue with those in another video. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.